Nicholas, if I could direct this one towards you. How successful have the various carbon markets been in actually reducing carbon emissions? I.e., what are the estimates for CO2 reductions so far?
Right. That's a very good question. I think the answer has to be that the results have been mixed. The main emissions trading scheme that's been in operation has been in the EU ETS, and Arnaud's probably in a better position to talk exactly what the volume has been there. As a friend of carbon markets, I think one of the most important things I can say is to direct some useful criticism in this example, in that often carbon markets can be set up and they establish institutions which can measure and account for carbon, but it's easy for vested interests to creep in and secure things like the subsidies for fossil fuels through the auctioning, through being allocated permits for free, and this undermines the actual environmental effectiveness incredibly of carbon markets at achieving their goal. I might hand to Arnaud to.
Yeah, I think just to give us two figures, if we look at US emissions, they increased by 15% since 1990, and if we look at EU emissions, they would probably meet the target or decrease by 8%. So I don't say that this is only due to carbon markets, it's due to many other factors, but clearly the fact that companies at an individual level to manage their CO2, to measure it, to verify it, to trade it, I think that's clearly play a role, and I think it's one of the explanations why EU emissions are decreasing, why US emissions are still rising. So, to my opinion, it can work, yeah.
Okay. Kate, if I could direct this one towards you, does using EU ETS as an argument for why a US-regulated market won't hurt voluntary carbon markets ignore institutional, political and cultural differences between Europe and the US?
I think that's a good point. I think that there certainly is, or has been, a greater awareness about climate change in the EU compared to the US. That being said, I think if you look at the different companies that are offsetting, the majority are in the EU. There's still a significant number of buyers in the US. So the US as a single country is the biggest buyer of carbon offsets out there, voluntary carbon offsets. So I think that sure that there'd be some companies that would offset in the EU but would not offset in the US, but I still see a pretty vibrant demand for pure voluntary purchases here in the US as well.
Okay, thank you. Gia, there's a question for you. Are you familiar with the Interpol report that carbon trading will be a huge new source of white-collar crime? And if so, are you able to comment on that?
I have not read the report in depth, but I am aware of it and read probably the summary. In terms of, certainly there is the potential for, and we've certainly seen, on the offset project side of things, potentially some projects that were perhaps not additional or maybe had other issues with them. I think, though, that I would tend to not characterize the carbon market as being a huge source for white-collar crime. I feel like when folks, the things that I think folks tend to get really concerned about in that are either that you have offset projects that are issuing credits that are blatantly not real credits that represent offsets according to the rules of the program. So, and I think that can be addressed, and a lot of progress has been made over the last couple of years to identify the issues and the challenges and to come up with solutions for how to improve offset programs over time. But I think there's actually a lot of progress being done on that front. And then the other concern tends to come from market speculation or speculative trading or doing things in the market that then manipulate the market. And again, it's going to be a quite large market and will be actually dominated largely by a lot of the folks who are big players in the energy commodity markets already. And those tend to be pretty established. You know, they know how to trade, they know how to manage commodity price risk, and so while there's always going to be the challenge of speculation, I don't see that the carbon market itself has any risk of speculative activity or market manipulation. And really, speculation is not the problem; it's market manipulation. There's any risk of manipulation of the market that's drastically different than what we would see from the rest of the energy commodity market, and that there definitely are issues that need to be fixed in the energy commodity market, and those fixes should apply to carbon in general, but I don't think it's unique to carbon.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Nicholas, if I just direct this to you initially, others might want to chip in. Can we actually achieve a carbon reduction globally through carbon trading? And then as a sub-question, surely there will be a shortfall of companies to trade with who are able to negate carbon emissions.
Right. I think the answer to that's yes. I think emissions trading schemes can cover quite credibly 3/4 of total anthropogenic emissions in a normal economy. So cap and trade is an essential part, in my view, of any credible carbon policy to bring down emissions. The second part of the question has to do with whether or not we'll be able to bring in countries like China, India, Brazil, Indonesia with the deforestation into some sort of carbon market where they can participate in this. And I think if the future is positive in that regard. I think it will be driven by carrots and sticks. The carrots are the incentives of positive growth for business in clean tech in those countries that can drive, China is the biggest market for solar energy now, for example, or one of the biggest producers of a variety of clean tech. But it's also the most rapidly sort of growing polluter of coal. And the stick will be the extent to which trade penalties are imposed on countries like China by countries like the United States. And I note that in the climate bill before the Senate at the moment, there is an intention to impose environmental tariffs into the future. It might be 5 or 10 years into the future if these countries who are outside the carbon regulatory system don't take action. And I think that that's a responsible way to go forward, because time has to be given to the developing world to put in place the institutions. But the prospect for green growth is just as bright as the prospect for dirty growth. And I think that switch has to be made and pressure has to be put so that switch is